Well, hello there. It's Silverpaw Reads here, and I'm finally doing Chapter 6 in Spike. There's a lot been going on with my life, coupled with school and relationships, and I have just had absolutely no time to record, and these chapters can get pretty long, so let's get on with Chapter 6. Morning, Dad, Sam said. Morning, Sam, Saunders yawned. It was early in the morning and just 30 minutes until Sam had to get off to school. Saunders had been up earlier than Sam, having to go down to the basement to check on how his plants were doing before starting on Sam's breakfast, and on the menu today was eggs and bacon. Sam sat down by the table, filling up his plate with bread, bacon, and eggs. He was feeling very hungry this morning, having missed supper last night. Did you sleep well? Saunders asked. Yeah, Sam answered. You? Saunders nodded in response and drank some of the chocolate milk. He didn't drink coffee in the morning. He preferred orange juice or chocolate milk. After all, he used to say, I'm still in my 20s. I have my full right to be childish. Sam poured some juice in his glass and drank it down within seconds. Whoa, you thirsty or what? Saunders commented. Sam just smiled and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he finished his plate and asked politely if he could leave the table. Sure, you're excused, came his father's reply, and so Sam left the kitchen and went upstairs to the bathroom to take a quick shower. Saunders sat by the table, wondering where his sudden politeness came from. Not that Sam wasn't a polite boy, but this was just a little too much, having to ask if he could leave the table at breakfast? And then he shrugged, brushing it all aside, ate some egg, and figured Sam was probably just trying to be like Spike. Again. Sam looked at himself in the mirror, foggy from the steam the shower had created. He frowned at what he saw. Why can't I be handsome, he thought, sighing. He looked from his face and down to his belly. My big, fat belly, Sam thought, letting out another deep sigh. Then he reached his hands down and took hold of his tummy, depressed that he could still create belly sausages. Then he stretched out his back, pulling his stomach in, and looked in the mirror to see what he'd look like if he was thinner. He got his jeans on and noticed today, as every other day, that his stomach was hanging slightly over his belt. This annoyed him greatly. Fatso, he wanted to shout at the mirror. However, he looked away from it, didn't want to see his ugly self anymore. Instead, he got his t-shirt on, a blue one today, then his socks, and was now fully dressed and ready to go to school. He started wondering how Spike looked at himself in the mirror. He must be proud of what he sees, lucky guy, Sam thought, enviously as he walked downstairs. Skinny-ass bastard, Spike thought to himself. He stood in front of a dirty mirror in the bathroom and was about to get dressed. He changed boxers and got yesterday's jeans on and was about to put yesterday's t-shirt on as well, but stopped when he saw his own reflection. He didn't like his face at all, and therefore he never looked at it when he faced a mirror. He instead looked straight at his body, even though he didn't like his body either. He hated mirrors, hated them with a passion. They forced him to face his ugliness every damn morning. Ribs, Spike thought, and poked his almost visible rib cage, and then he pinched his belly to see if he'd gained any weight. But he still didn't feel any fat between his fingers, only skin tissue. It didn't boost his as good as non-existing self-esteem one bit that he had nice man waves on his arms, or that it was just a matter of sit-ups away from having a boyish six-pack. His idols were people with huge, bulging muscles, manly eight-packs, and whatnot. Compared to them, Spike was merely a walking skeleton. At least in his eyes. He was thinking quickly, interrupted by Chuck pounding on the bathroom door. Hurry up, asshole! There are other people than you living in this house. Get your ass out of there! Yes, sir. Just a second, sir, Spike said and hurriedly got his t-shirt on. Didn't have the time to brush his teeth this morning and had to use his fingers to comb his tousled hair. He opened the door and let Chuck enter while he went to the kitchen to make the two of them some breakfast. Chuck had demanded oatmeal this morning. Spike didn't like oatmeal, but obviously his uncle did, so Spike had to eat it up anyways. He went to one of the cabinets, grabbed a kettle, and put it on the ingredients and placed it on the stove, stirring the simmering oatmeal with a fork, and 15 minutes later, Chuck was done in the bathroom and breakfast was ready to be served. Chuck had good table manners despite how unhygienic he was, and demanded Spike having good table manners as well. It was thanks to Chuck that Spike was so polite and well-behaved. They had strict behavioral rules in their house, or rather, Chuck's house. Spike's old uncle was actually quite the gentleman. He just didn't care to behave like one in front of his nephew at times, hardly at any time at all for that matter. After breakfast, Spike was ordered to wash up before he left. The clock was ticking away, and Spike did the dishes as fast and carefully as he could. He promised he'd walk together with Sam to school this morning, and he didn't want to be late. I'm leaving now, sir, Spike said half an hour later. You be back right after school, you hear me? Chuck retorted, didn't even bother to look away from the TV. A few bottles of beer were already standing open on the table in front of the couch, and with one of the bottles having been emptied, Spike figured it was definitely about time to get out of the house before another one got drank down. And Chuck started getting second thoughts about letting him leave. I'll be back as fast as I can, Spike promised, and so he left the house as quickly and quietly as he could. He had to run through the forest to make it in time. He was sure Sam was standing there waiting for him right now. It would be no one but Spike's fault if Sam got late for class. And, just as he thought, Sam was waiting loyally at their meeting point, sitting on a log with his backpack lying on the dry ground. Having been running the fastest he could through the thick forest with a heavy school bag on his back, Spike had to stop and catch his breath when he finally reached Sam. Sorry. he panted before Sam got the chance to ask him why he was late. No, not at all. It's okay, Sam smiled warm. He was just about to see Spike had made it and was coming with him to school after all. Spike inhaled deeply one final time, then stood up and exhaled slowly through his nose, and so he was done catching his breath. He didn't have a watch on him, but he was pretty sure they were at least an hour late by now, so he couldn't waste any more time being exhausted. Come on, let's go, Spike said to Sam and started walking, though making sure he didn't walk in front of Sam. Spike was the self-declared underdog of any pack and could never walk in front of anyone. Plus, he hated it when people stood or walked behind him. One could never know what their intentions were, and if they would suddenly turn at you. For a while, none of them said anything. They were both focused on walking fast. However, Sam was focused on something else as well, whether to ask Spike an important question or to wait until later. Spike noticed shortly after that Sam looked very concentrated and asked him what he was thinking of. Sam was silent at first, but he replied the question with a question. Hey, Spike, can I ask you something? Spike blinked. Sure, shoot. He said, a little uncomfortable, knowing by the way Sam had asked him that this was one of those serious questions Spike didn't like. Well, actually, it's more of a suggestion than a question, sort of, Sam continued. He glanced over at Spike, who was frowning a little and focusing on what Sam was saying. It didn't make talking any easier because Sam knew something inside that Spike wasn't going to like his suggestion. Oh, the hell with it, Sam thought. He goes, Spike, about the beating and stuff, you know? What about it? Spike said incredulously. I think we should tell someone. That was all Sam got to say before Spike veered around and grabbed Sam's shirt by the collar, slamming his back into a nearby tree. Tell someone? Spike hissed, his face dangerously close to Sam's. Have you forgotten your promise? You swore that you would never tell anyone, and now you fucking suggest us do that? Spike was enraged. Sam could tell that he was clearly, by the look in Spike's eyes and the sound in his husky voice, not to mention that he just slammed Sam into a tree. Spike, listen, Sam urged. I know I promised, but it's just, You what? Spike growled. Tell me what makes you think you want to break a promise. He took a hold of Sam's shirt with both hands, now, and lifted him up so his feet were dangling ever so slightly above the ground. Sam grabbed Spike's wrist, trying to pull his strong arms away from him. Let go, he begged. Tell me, Spike said, fuming. I just... Sam stammered through grit teeth and had his eyes shut. I just can't stand knowing that someone's hurting you, he shouted. Spike turned very silent. His face wasn't mild, but he didn't look enraged anymore. There was an almost unreadable look in his eyes, a mixture of sorrow and confusion. He put Sam down on the ground again, let go of his shirt, and turned his head away and looked down, frowning a little. What do you care whether I get beaten or not? He then said. What do I care? Sam repeated. Spike, you're my best friend. Of course I care. I care a whole lot about you. And it hurts to know that Chuck beats you, that someone causes harm to you. I don't want that. I want you to be happy all the time. Well, that's stupid, Spike started. No one can be happy all the time. Maybe so, but my point is that I don't want you to be unhappy, to be in pain. If there's anything I can do to stop it, then I will. I'll do whatever it takes. You will do no such thing, Spike said, threatening. But, Sam stuttered, why not? Do I have to repeat it? You promised. I know, but this is serious. Shut up! Sam's eyes widened. It was the first time in years that he'd heard Spike yell, and it was sure effective. Sam was left taciturn. Fuck. Just shut up, Spike said a little calmer, though still as serious as before. If you really care about me, you won't tell anyone. I don't understand, Sam finally spoke. Why? Spike sighed. Forget it. No, tell me. I don't understand, Sam persisted. It's like I said, if you really care about me, you won't tell anyone about the beating. You'll just forget about it and never bring it up again, Spike explained. Why? Spike said again, why can't you just listen to what I say? I don't like repeating myself. Just stay out of it, Sam. Sam looked away. Okay, he said, nodded carefully. Okay, I won't tell. Not even Saunders? Spike asked grave. Not even Dad, Sam said with a sigh. I promise. Good, Spike said. Now come on, let's get to class. Finally arrived at their school, Sam and Spike split up so no one saw them together. That was one of Spike's demands. He had told Sam to stay away from him at school and pretend he didn't know him because he didn't want to drag Sam to all the trouble that happened around Spike. So they separated and went to each of their classrooms without a word or even a gesture. Spike had to calm himself by taking a deep breath before he knocked on the door and entered his classroom. He was met by one of his worst nightmares. Well, over 30 similar-aged, judgmental kids staring hard at him and having to walk through that crowd being observed. He got over to his desk, sat down on his chair, and then they would stare at him some more. They despised him. He knew they did. He just knew it, both boys and girls alike, and they all despised him. But no one despised him more than the teacher who now called his name in a most agitated voice. Spike Schaefer, his math teacher Derek began. Did you get my note?" "What note, sir?" Spike carefully said, glancing up at Derek. He hadn't given it any thought when Sam first brought it up that evening at Saunders' place, but now it was suddenly struck him as strange that Sam had been given the note when him and Spike had never been seen together. It should have been impossible for people to tell they knew each other. Derek had been standing with his back against the students, and now finally he turned away from the blackboard he was writing on and stared at Spike. "Samuel Sanders, I understand he lives quite close to you, is that correct?" "The hell?" Spike thought. "Do the teachers know where I live? Not even Sam knows where I live." Spike felt a hint of panic present inside him. He decided to keep playing dumb. "Sir, with all respect, I don't know what you're talking about." "He's a student in your parallel class. I gave him a note as I've seen you two walk from school together." "Fucking nosy little asshole," Spike thought. "Is Derek spying on me?" "Sir, there are quite a few students walking the same way as I do. I don't know the names of even half of them." Spike could see that his nosy teacher still didn't buy that Spike didn't know Sam, but it seemed that he was giving up anyway, not bothering to waste his time arguing with some worthless student. "Very well then, Spike," Derek said. "I've scheduled a math test for you, seeing as how you've been absent for quite a while and you've missed out on some of the tests. I originally scheduled it to be taken this morning, but since you're late, I've arranged a little detention for you instead." Derek smirked. Spike could hear his classmates giggle all around him, and sank down into his chair. This day was just about to be doomed to blow big time. "Hi, sorry I'm late," Sam smiled innocently as he entered his classroom. "Hello, Sam," a red girl carefully said with a warm smile. Sam smiled back at her and a few others who greeted him. He walked over to his desk, apologizing to the teacher for being late before he sat down in his chair. The teacher, a lady in her 30s, said it was fine and the only form of punishment Sam would get was some extra homework. Sam didn't mind and he quite enjoyed doing homework. Except math, though. Luckily, his father would have always helped out with that. Sam unzipped his backpack and took out his books and pencil case. The teacher started talking to her students. Sam listened carefully at first and took plenty of notes, but soon he lost focus as he started to think of something else entirely. He was doodling instead of taking notes, drew little stars at first, and he found himself drawing hearts, and then the heart led him to think of his special someone. There was this person Sam had a secret crush on, a crush he hadn't told anyone about, and hadn't even told Spike about it. So he drew hearts thinking of this person, then very carefully and making sure no one was watching, with tiny letters he wrote a name inside one of the hearts. He looked at it, blushed from actually having dared writing that name, and smiled from the thought of that person. However, he quickly turned the page. He couldn't let anyone see the name he'd written. It had to remain a secret. Sam sat through class paying close attention to what the teacher said, though he couldn't keep his mind from the heart with the secret name in it, and how he had to get rid of it. When class was finally over and recess began, Sam ripped out the page, curled it up real hard, and thinking no one saw him, he threw it in the trash can. What he didn't know was that someone saw him. Someone had kept an eye on him, and now this someone curiously picked up Sam's secret paper and put it into his pocket for later.